Welcome to the Energeia Podcast. This is Dr. G, bringing the good word to you as always. And today I'm joined by Alan van Oosten. Alan is Associate Professor of Organizational Behavior and the Faculty Director of Executive Education at the Weatherhead School of Management at Case Western Reserve University, where she is also Director of the Coaching Research Lab, a joint initiative between leading scholars and organizations seeking to develop more comprehensive understandings of coaching and other helping relationships through empirical research. Alan is also a founding fellow at the Institute of Coaching at Harvard Medical School and a member of the Consortium for Research on Emotional Intelligence. Alan's published work has appeared in academic outlets such as Harvard Business Review, The Leadership Quarterly, Academy of Management Learning and Education, Frontiers in Psychology, and Consulting Psychology Journal Research and Practice. Most topically, Alan is also the co-author of the book, Helping People Change, Coaching with Compassion for Lifelong Learning and Growth, whose central themes will be guiding much of our conversation today. So Alan, thank you, my dear and dearly missed friend, for joining me today. And it's so great to be collaborating with you again after so many years of what seemed like day in, day out collaborations. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. And I've missed you, Gareth. So this is just a delight to be able to pick up on some of our ongoing conversations and to be a guest on your podcast.
Well, the feelings of missing and delight go both ways, I assure you. So, we could cover, you and I, plenty of ground, but given we have a little over an hour to play with, let's get down to brass tacks, I say, and maybe as a place to start, would you just give our listeners as quick a lowdown as you'd care to share on your career to date, and just perhaps how your professional journey led you toward all the various plates you seem to currently have spinning in unison in your day-to-day work in coaching, teaching, executive education, and all the other various hats that you wear?
Sure, happy to. So I think a good place to start might be jumping off after college, which was focused on electrical engineering. So that was my degree. And I went to work for a big organization that many know, General Electric in the United States, in an area of technical sales, which meant I spent a lot of time in manufacturing plants, helping them to automate assembly lines and machines. And I did that for a number of years and traveled around. And I'm a bit of a manufacturing geek. Like, I just love being in manufacturing plants. So that's just something that I've always carried with me from those early days. I pursued my MBA at the Weatherhead School, which really became another kind of launch pad and relevant to our conversation, because my first class was a class that was transformational for me. And it's one where I got to learn from the legendary David Kolb around learning styles and experiential learning, and also experienced a course taught by Richard Boyatzis, which was an opportunity to really think about my future and create a personal vision. And we also did that working with an executive action team. So as you'll hear, those kind of early experiences set me on a path to what I'm doing today. After graduating with my MBA, I got to work for a completely different organization and industry. I went to work in retail and was in a role of human resources. So I made quite a shift from engineering and manufacturing. And I spent most of my time developing our territory and regional sales managers. So that was my main role. I also did a lot of coaching, and that was my first introduction to coaching leaders, mostly around 360 feedback at that time. And I really, really enjoyed that. I had an opportunity to come back to the Weatherhead School as a staff member, working for a beloved professor who was heading up executive education. And he gave me this opportunity, which I'm forever grateful for, to have the safety net of the university, but to try out kind of my capabilities at building a business. And so my role was to develop from scratch our custom executive programs division for the Weatherhead School. And I did that for many, many years, working with industry and being a bridge to the incredible faculty at the Weatherhead School and the courses that they teach, and trying to bring what was relevant to what organizations really needed, to develop their people. And so that sweet spot of like really being the bridge, but also sitting with organizations and learning and understanding what it is that they really need and see as the development areas for their key leaders is something that I really enjoyed. And then I caught the bug, because when you hang out with Weatherhead faculty, in particular organization behavior faculty, it's just contagious. And so from those experiences, I decided to pursue my PhD in organization behavior, which I did for several years while working and so on. And fast forward, I became a professor in our organization behavior department. My areas of research are executive coaching, and the intersection between leader development, like individual development, and organization development. And I spend most of my time now with organizations developing their leaders, with our MBA students, helping them to become the best leader possible. I also head up our coaching research lab, and I oversee and teach our coach certificate program. So that's a little bit about me and kind of what keeps me busy now and kind of how I got here.
Yeah, it's a little bit about a lot of work. And I mean, I know so many people that have been such grateful beneficiaries of your counsel and your teaching and, your insight over the years. So, you've been a formative influence on my own career. And so, first and foremost, I just want to say thank you for, all the inspiration you've given me and, giving me the opportunity to collaborate with you, working at the coaching research lab and so forth. It's been huge for my own career and my own development. But let's set ourselves aside and get into the conceptual grist of our discussion today. And I say let's start with one of the major leitmotifs of your book, Helping People Change, and which has also been a leitmotif of so much of your other work, the centrality of compassion to helping people to help themselves versus the perceived limitations of compliance-oriented approaches. So how would you, in your own words, contrast or juxtapose coaching or individual development, which is centered around compassion, with those perhaps more conventional, more mainstream approaches that are focused on achieving compliance? And just how much is compassion a driving engine in the process of helping people change?
Mm-hmm. Thank you for your kind comments before, Gareth. And yeah, so much of our experiences together really stand out for me as just a ton of fun and really like mind and heart expanding. So thank you for that. Now, in terms of this prompt that you're sharing, I'm excited to talk with you and your listeners a little bit more about it, because I think it really starts with this central premise, and that is, as let's at least think about the workplace. Most of us, what we really want for others is to help them change in some way so that they're successful. So if we're the managers, we want people on our team to be successful, right? We also want people to be able to be promoted and go on and do good things. The issue is that most of us go about it in exactly the wrong way. And so what do I mean by that? Well, in our eagerness to really, quote, help, I'll say in quotes, right? And so whether it's a student, if you've got listeners who are educators, or direct reports, in a classic kind of work context, or even parents, as it relates to kind of our children, we often jump to telling people what to do. So that's one of our defaults. And we tend to jump to pointing out all the things that they're not doing right so that they can fix them. And so we kind of go after helping others, whether it's conscious or subconscious, pointing out all the things that need to change to help them, quote, improve. However, this actually flies in the face of what we know in terms of like just what humans need. So you and I can talk about some of those theories and just, the reality of that. And the research that myself, but our colleagues at the Weatherhead School, who you also know well and have studied with over many years. And what that research really reminds us of and points out to us. And that is that in those situations where we're really focused more on what we say deficit-based thinking, like fix this, close this gap, it's likely to put a person in a position of feeling obligated, or to put the focus on complying to some external wish, encouragement, expectation, or even demand. And it activates something physiologically inside of us. So we can talk about that. And that's known as the negative emotional attractor. What it really does, though, is that when we kind of coach or engage with others from a compliance perspective, the person shuts down and they're likely to feel defensive. So the antidote to that is what we consider to be kind of a compassionate approach. And in the context that you and I are talking, kind of coaching others with compassion. So what does that mean? That means really leading with an emphasis, leading the interaction and approach with an emphasis on the other person and connecting with them. So it's not about the task primarily, it's about the connection and the relationship and tuning into the person, and also demonstrating you care. And how do you do that? Well, some of it is prioritizing, that you're having a conversation with them, and being interested and curious from a non-judgmental perspective, how they're thinking, how they're feeling, and then listening. So a big piece of it when we get to like what it looks like in a specific or practical way, it's about having interactions or conversations that have the potential to inspire others.
Right. I mean, you mentioned the negative emotional attractor there. I just think that, so much of the great work that's been done in the coaching research lab and at the Weatherhead School more widely has been predicated on this idea of striking a balance between these so-called positive and negative emotional attractors, the PEA and the NEA, and with a lopsided, although not exclusive, emphasis on the PEA, and we might talk about that. I've often heard yourself and our mutual friend and colleague Richard Boyatzis, among others, use the expression, we need the NEA to survive and the PEA to thrive. And so from there, on that basis, what best allows people to achieve the right balance? In so much as it's lopsided, but not exclusively so, towards the PEA, with a little bit of focus on the NEA. Again, we need it to survive. What best allows people to achieve that right balance? Now, the details I realize might differ for different people, but for most people, what are sort of the broad brush rules of thumb around how you achieve that balance between the sort of hope and vision-driven emotional states that promote personal flourishing, those of the PEA, with the more sort of bare bones function, homeostasis-driven emotional states that promote personal survival, which we typically associate with the NEA? What sort of ratio or calculus is required of people typically to make change based on toggling between and finding that right balance of the PEA and NEA?
Yeah, that's such an important thing for us to talk about. So thanks for opening that up. I think it might be helpful if we even together set the stage a bit around like what's the language that we're using. What's it really mean? So I'll share just a high level overview of PEA as you and I are talking about it, and NEA. So the PEA, what that stands for is positive emotional attractor, and NEA similarly would be negative emotional attractor. The way I think of it and the way I like to describe it to others is that you actually have like two circles together, like, kind of butting up or touching one another. They're not overlapping, so to speak. One is a PEA and one is a NEA. That simple image and visual actually is useful for us to understand human emotion, meaning that we are always moving back and forth, think like a figure eight, around these positive and negative emotional attractors. I like to think of them as magnets. They kind of pull us in a direction, back and forth. This happens subconsciously to all of us as human beings all the time. So we are constantly moving between positive and negative emotional states. Sometimes we are more conscious and aware, that we're in those states, but many times we're not. So one of the main things for all of us to remember is that we don't control that. It's a human phenomena, and that there are psychophysiological correlates. So what does that really mean? That means that neurologically, as well as physiologically and affectively, it's a mouthful to say all those things, right? There are characteristics that correspond to those states. And that's where it gets really interesting when we're working with others and we're thinking about contexts like leadership and coaching and how we are trying to motivate and inspire others to follow us or to change, right? Because if I go back to my previous comments about like what our defaults tend to be, even though we want to inspire others on our team, right, to follow us, in the heat of the moment, a lot of times we might resort to giving orders or telling people this is what my expectations are. And I'm expecting you to kind of like rise to them, basically, like tough love and all of those things. And we're going to go for this goal. And it's a big, hairy, audacious goal, and so on and so on. Those approaches are not bad in and of themselves. It's not as simple as saying it's good or bad. What we really have come to appreciate, though, is that in order to really encourage or like facilitate motivation on the part of others, like intrinsic motivation and learning and growth and change, we have to be able to inspire it. And we don't inspire it with those common approaches. So how do you then inspire it, right? Well, understanding like how humans, the state that they're in and need to be in order to learn and grow and change in ways that are sticky, that really hold, that are enduring, a couple of things need to be present. First of all, they need to feel cared for. They need to feel like somebody knows who they are and that they care about them as a person. They also, in those moments, we as humans actually are able to manifest change for ourselves. We're motivated to do that when we can see a picture of a future that's exciting and that's for us something that encompasses what we care about. So that's work that we call, or we get to it by helping people think about what they're dreaming or imagining for their future, anchored in their core values and their purpose, that they're really inspired and motivated to achieve. And so positive emotions are one incredible lever to create that inspiration and that environment. Why is that? Well, we activate the parasympathetic nervous system in our body, and that becomes an antidote to kind of stress of the sympathetic nervous system. So when we're in an NEA state, we've got these other kind of physiological correlates. And so when we're able to engage more positive emotion, we actually kind of like open ourselves up cognitively, emotionally, and physiologically. And so the neat thing is, or I think the really interesting thing I've always found, is the research that supports that and what we're learning. So the takeaway would be like, we need both positive and negative emotion. They serve different purposes. Negative emotions can help us sharpen our focus and kind of like marshal our internal resources when we need to. It's just that we can't thrive, we can't flourish, we can't maintain that if we're always in that state. And instead, we need more positive emotion and doses of that to be able to imagine like exciting future and unleash like the energy to keep going, whether it's resilience or to dream and imagine a new kind of product or service for our organization or whatever the context, be able to engage with, with somebody else. Now, you asked about like, what's the balance and the dosage? And that is, as you know, that's something that's being debated still in our field. However, the debate aside, we can say with a fair amount of certainty that 3-to-1 is a good gauge, meaning to aim for like a balance of 3-1 around positive emotion over negative in the conversation, in the interaction, in the relationship, on the team, and so on. So whatever the system is, just think about over the course of even like some period of time, let's say a week, a month, or just the life of a team, like how might you characterize and qualify the emotional tone? And looking at that and being able to be deliberate about, hey, if the team needs to be infused with hope, love, joy, optimism, interest, humor, fun, right? Those are all examples of different ways to facilitate positive emotion. So let me pause there because you can see you've already sparked something that for me is really one of my favorite topics to talk about. But let me pause so I don't go too far down the path.
Yeah, there's just a couple of things I wanted to say. It's just on the 3-1 ratio. So I always had this kind of, because you said the word qualify there, which I think is very, very important because, of course, the 3-1 ratio originated with Barbara Fredrickson some years ago. And, the debate that you're kind of alluding to, the scholarly debate, is kind of around, well, is this a precise number? Is this ratio accurate? And there's been a lot of scholars that have sort of sought out to, to debunk and discredit this idea. And I've always thought what a just pointless waste of time that was because, okay, so, maybe there is a way to quantify it, but I think just as a guiding rule of seeking quality, that ratio gets it about right. Right. I mean, we're not asking people to reverse engineer the emotional course of their day and making sure it's an on the money 3-1 ratio. It's a guide, and frankly, I think it's a good guide. I think for most people, that idea of 3-1, most people's response isn't, well, is that an accurate ratio? It's, it sounds about right. And so I think it lands with people. But I just want to build on, your this, one of the recurrent things you mentioned, inspiring people towards their dreams and, building the best possible future for themselves. Another recurrent theme that comes up in the book and elsewhere in your work is the importance of vision in helping people, in helping to promote change and helping people change. We often hear about vision, being described in these sort of very lofty terms, almost by definition, I guess. And it's, often said that vision is what sets leadership apart from management, for example, or what differentiates innovation from idle creativity. But it's also been, argued by yourself and others that it's critical to how any one individual, as you've just been discussing, achieves the kind of personal and behavioral changes that they truly desire, and also the ones that are the most sustainable for them, the ones that are going to stick. And yet, I think when some people think about vision, it conjures up images of not so much dreaming in the way that you're talking about, but more sort of pie in the sky, daydreamy, or, kind of far sight without the now sight. So how do we tether that pursuit of vision to reality? Is there a fine line between visionary thinking and wish thinking? And I mean, if so, how do we sort of safeguard against that?
Yeah. Couple thoughts come to mind from what you've just shared and that question. And the immediate thing that is top of mind for me is, what do we really know about how adults learn and change? Like, what do we understand from adult learning theory, for instance, and motivation theory, both? So here's like a couple of things at a high level without kind of quoting specific studies and whatnot. But we do know that adults learn and change and grow when they want to or when they perceive they need to. And what I didn't say is that they learn, change, grow when somebody directs them to go do it. Now, we will comply. So back to what we were just discussing, right? Adults will comply with like a directive for a whole lot of reasons. They need to keep their job. They want to do good work. They're not sure what else to do. They have respect for their manager or boss or whomever it is that's asking them, and so on, right? However, we can't fool ourselves that all of their energy and engagement is like fully part of that response. And in fact, in many cases, the difference is there's a whole lot of discretionary effort that is left on the table. And so that's something that we have to all remember, including about ourselves. Like, we know these things about ourselves, right? So another thing that, like, in parallel with that I think is relevant is that we know from motivation theory, including Deci and Ryan's work, which I think has really been pivotal, and certainly to me in my own work in understanding humans. And that is, we're motivated when some conditions are met, like a condition of autonomy, which really is about free will. Like, you have a voice, you have a say in whatever it is you're doing or where you're going. Another is an inherent need to do good work, like, and demonstrate competence, again, in areas that you care about, right? And a third is relatedness or connectedness. So we have, as humans, to varying degrees based on personality, but we all desire and need to feel connected to something bigger than ourselves. What a vision is in the classic sense, like around like leadership effectiveness or hallmarks of great leaders, like you were pointing out, I think really is a combination of a couple of those things, meaning a really great vision. And when people who are in leadership roles are adept at creating it for others, it paints this exciting picture of the future that then enables people to choose, like, hey, I want to be all in, or that is exciting to me, and I want to be able to support that. It's something that, I have a stake in. Again, the autonomy and the competence kind of start to line up to that. But the connectedness is huge. People want to belong to something bigger than themselves. Now, what vision really is, I like to break it down, though, at a personal level. Vision, in the way that we think about it, is a bit synonymous with dreaming. What does that mean? Well, really, it's about our ability to creatively picture a different reality. And in this case, kind of like a future reality. And that's not for a lot of us accessible as adults. However, we don't have to look too far. We can look to kids. If you hang out with little children or even remember being one, right? Little children are much more apt to imagine, and we talk about that in the book, right? Some examples about, we ask little kids all the time, what do you want to be when you grow up, right? And they're able to not only answer that, but they like to dress up, in that way. And we support all that. Somewhere along the line, though, in all of our like education systems and just kind of culturally, we shut that down. Yet that core capability is exactly what organizations want when they want more innovative thinking, and they want people to be creative and come up with like a new approach to some like big challenge that their clients are facing or that the business needs to reinvent themselves around. So it's the same skill set, yet our systems are not set up for that. So when we work with individuals, we start there. We start there in helping them not so much kind of immediately create a vision, but to think and kind of play a little bit creatively with what? Well, what is it that you really would love to do in your life? And what is it that has meaning for you? What do you care about? So we have series of conversations. It's not one, it's like a series to help them really discover and uncover these aspects of what really is exciting, energizing, and meaningful to individuals. Putting it together in some expression is the vision. Like, that's what we call the vision. And that expression could be a written statement. It could be like a headline, or even like, as you know, we, kind of take it to the level of even several page assignments, when we work with our degree students. But for others, we often say, like, what's a 7 to 10 word phrase that captures that picture? But a lot of people don't quite get there fully with words. So another way to help them is to invite them to identify an item or an image, a picture that articulates or represents what it is that they really care about. I guess the I like to just summarize it with folks. I don't even use the word vision a lot of times initially because of what you said. It can be a bit daunting, but if you peel it back, it's an invitation and guidance around discovery of who it is you really wish to be in the future, and what is it that you really wish to do that's exciting and energizing in the future. And those two kind of like the being doing and somehow helping them to be able to tap into that and then express it comes together in a vision.
Yeah, look, I really appreciate the connection you made to little kids there, and the fact that, just the allusion to the idea that along the way we kind of get this tendency to think big and think ambitiously and think aspirationally kind of tuned out of us by the realities of everyday adult life. I think I saw Alison Gopnik, a philosopher and child developmental psychologist, speak once. And she was speaking about how human beings are the only species that knows how to counterfactualize. And that's really the same thing in many ways as thinking about a vision. The ability to counterfactualize kind of goes hand in hand with a vision. And it's something that little kids do spontaneously. We're the only species that does it. And so all these efforts to take the vision and the dreaming aspect out of how we think about ourselves is kind of in a real sense kind of denying our birthright as humans, or at least I would put it that way anyway. That's maybe a rabbit hole for another day. I also want to come back to Deci and Ryan and self-determination theory, but I just want to linger on the idea of connectedness for a moment. Now, we won't go into the full details of intentional change theory here. Anyone who's interested in intentional change theory, plenty of work online about it. It's what so much of the work at Where the Head is predicated on. Also listen to my podcast with Lauren Dyke, where we go into a little bit more detail about it. But the fifth of the 5 discovery phases in the intentional change theory model is developing resonant relationships. So what, in your view, makes a relationship resonant? As compared to, say, merely helpful or supportive, that may be part of it. And how crucial are these sorts of resonant relationships to helping people change? What sorts of interpersonal and human skills are required of the helper and the helpee alike to foster such resonance? You mentioned, before, paying attention, really listening to what the other person has to say, really caring about them and things like that. Is there anything else in addition to that you would add in terms of just what we need to ensure that we're making the relationships that we have truly resonant?
Yeah, so I like to start with even the words, just like we did a little bit ago, because as you know, especially those of us who play in the academic space, we're never at a loss for terms and even jargon when it gets to kind of a collective level that not everybody may understand or may lend themselves to kind of different interpretations. So let's even start with like the term of like resonant relationship and what that really means. It really borrows metaphors. So it's a metaphorical expression from music and from physics, both. So we kind of cover a couple of different arenas there. What does that really mean? Well, musical context resonance, when we achieve it, really is about harmony, right? In more of a science-based view, resonance in terms of kind of sine waves means like the waves are kind of moving in the same cadence, right? So just kind of synthesizing those metaphors and contexts, resonance in a relationship way really is about being in tune with and in sync with another person. So in tune and in sync. That right there, I mean, I do, a lot of work with senior leaders in my coaching practice. We talk about that, like how in tune are you? How in sync are you with those on your team, with your peers, with your manager, and so on. And so that's like an important starting place, and often an area for deep reflection and growth there. Because if we operate with a focus mostly on task, then we are living and interacting with others from that space. And it's all about the work and getting the task done. And we know that activates the NEA most of the time. Again, not in a negative way necessarily, not in a detrimental way. It's not all bad. It's just that we can't do our best work perpetually in that state. So we need to appreciate that there are other states, but we also need to appreciate that there's a relationship here. And so prioritizing the relationship over just like the work that has to get done, certainly in the context of leadership. And for many of us, when we work with leaders who wish to be coaches, it's the same kind of principle. So how do you go about it? And why is that important, right? Those are some of your questions. How do you create a resonant relationships and a relationship with others? And, what's the benefit? Does it really make a difference? I think I want to take even the second part of that first, because I want to go back to what we know about how people, particularly adults, learn and change and grow in ways that are, we like to say, like sticky. So you brought up intentional change theory, and without going into all the details, as you mentioned, there are 5 different discoveries. The discoveries really represent how adults learn and change in ways that then results in kind of sustained development, growth, change. One thing that we know to be true is that we really don't get as far as we could. We don't maintain change as a solo act. So embarking on change, a journey of development and growth, and then being able to sustain and maintain it doesn't happen to the same degree if we're going about it on our own. We need trusting, supportive relationships around us to continue to kind of help us along the way. Again, I'm kind of putting helping in quotes because that's contextual based on whatever the situation is. For some people, that notion right there is novel, or maybe even something that for them is at odds with a strong independent streak. So we're not saying that people, there's not value in independent work. We're just saying in reality, especially in a professional context, very little of what we do as somebody kind of like rises up into higher levels of influence and leadership is a solo act. Everything they do, every piece of the day is connected to somebody else. So appreciating there's a human component and being able to lean into that, and by focusing on the other person as a person, seeing them as a person is an important place to start. And so practically, like, how do you do that? You mentioned listening, right? So that's a big one. But along with that, it's a mindset. It's a mindset that this relationship is important, that this is a person who's here on my team or who I'm coaching or whatever the context, and they have talents, they have gifts, they have desires, they have dreams. And part of my job is to understand that to the extent that they're willing to share it. And so a leader's work especially is to create like an environment in their interaction, but also broadly speaking, well, people are encouraged, but also feel safe to engage, with others in that way. So being curious, as opposed to judgmental, is a big piece of that mindset shift. Not feeling like you have all the answers and your job is to tell somebody what to do. Instead, your job is to kind of like help draw out others' ideas is another big piece of it. And then to be able to operate or like with a mindset of it's really about seek to understand, not just be understood. And as part of that, to live that out, it's showing up curious, caring. That's the compassion piece, that you really care about the individual, wanting to hear what they have to say and how they're feeling. So it lends itself to asking more questions and listening deeply, not just to what someone's telling you, but like the big picture, listening beyond what you hear. So it goes back to like this interaction and the conversation, and conversations that really are characterized mostly by compassion for the others and inspiration. And so that's, I guess, how we think about it and help others to develop relationships that, are resonant in their quality.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's such simple wisdom, but it's such sage wisdom at the same time, right? We're not talking about skill like groundbreakingly, paradigm shiftingly, out of this world new approaches that leaders have to adopt, right? A lot of it is really just about bonding and common humanity, and kind of the details follow from there. And I did, just as a placeholder, I did have a question I wanted to ask you before about potentially how we reconcile that tension that you just mentioned, that some people, or the tension as some people might perceive it, between independence on the one hand and the need for resonant relationships on the other hand. But first, I want to quote directly from chapter 10 of your book, where yourself, Richard, and Melvin state that, quote, the personal sustainability of the helper or coach is central to the ability to continue effectively helping others be open, develop, and change. And I'm also reminded of this wonderful article by Tatiana Bakarova, I hope I'm not mispronouncing her name, about the idea of the instrument of the coach, and how you, as the instrument, the coach, need to take care of the instrument, being you, and in order to be able to coach in the long run. And I personally have a very strong version of this perspective, in so much as I see it as professionally irresponsible, bordering on unethical, if a coach does not take intentional steps to ensure their own personal sustainability. And this is perhaps going to segue onto a conversation we'll have about self-care and well-being to come. But given what you've said in the book, what I just quoted you directly from there, what are the sorts of steps that a coach themselves can take in order to sustainably put themselves in the best possible position to sustainably help other people?
It really starts with an awareness of something you mentioned from Tatiana's work or article, and that is understanding that you yourself, in the interaction, in the role, again, as of helper, and any helping relationship is, includes being the manager, being the coach, being the mentor, being the parent, being the educator, being the physician, the nurse, and so on. So anytime we're really engaging with others, where we're seeking to provide some assistance or help, which actually is a lot of our professional roles and identity, it's appreciating in that moment that we can become a contagion. So we know emotions are contagious, right? We know that, as you mentioned, Barbara Fredrickson's work. We know that from a lot of other work, including the work done by Richard Boyatzis over the last 50 years, helping us to understand the emotional and social competencies, right, that really characterize the most effective leaders. So broadly speaking, just for our conversation and a bit of shorthand, we could even just call that emotional intelligence. But really what it's about is that we know that emotions are contagious. And so in, say, a coaching role, or in that trusting, supportive relationship role that we were just discussing, it is being aware that when we engage with others, then whatever's happening for us has the potential to then infect and affect the other person. And that means we need to be responsible for the emotions that we're spreading. Let's go back to the PEA and NEA discussion that we were having. If our main aim, let's say we're in the role of coaching others, since that's a focus of the book and something that we do a lot of work in, or your manager is trying to coach and develop, your somebody on your team, realizing and appreciating that you need to support them being in a place where they feel appreciated, feel understood, are mindful about what it is that they are interested in and care about for themselves. And that unleashes that positive emotion. But if you go into those conversations not aware of that or not prioritizing that, and if maybe you are hijacked by something that's happening, outside of the conversation, you can very easily bring that into the dynamic. And it might show up in all sorts of ways. You're not able to fully listen. You're missing what the other person is saying. You're not able to really be curious. You're actually evaluating and judging what they're saying, right? And so it goes back to a responsibility, which I know, is a lot of, you have a point of view on that, and also some great work you've been doing, but responsibility on the part of the quote helper to get themselves and keep themselves to the best of their ability in a holistically healthy space, meaning like healthy mentally, healthy emotionally, healthy physically. We are human beings though. So I think of it as just like a lifelong kind of like perpetual pursuit. It's not something like, yep, okay, I'm all set. I'm now healthy, right? It doesn't really work that way. It's an invitation always there. And even, and a really important responsibility based on some of our roles, that we do our very best to try to set ourselves up to be able to be in a place where we're thriving and flourishing ourselves, that we're well, so well-being and personal well-being then becomes something that's really relevant and important, because we can only help someone else in that moment to the extent that we ourselves, we can only help somebody else to kind of be at their best or to do their best work and thinking when we ourselves are bringing, our best self and our best thinking. And I put kind of best in quotes. I think of those not as an end state, but as really like a magnet kind of drawing us forward all the time, both inviting us, but also holding us a little bit accountable at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and optimality is not perfection, right? And striving for your best is not striving for perfection. But I mean, Alan, you've just set us up perfectly here for our next topical line of inquiry, because between you and I and all the many overlapping circles we have on our individual Venn diagrams, we share this very passionate and very conversation-friendly interest in self-care, well-being, other such related topics. We've spoken so much about it over the years. And I think so much about the major themes in helping people change are so germane and so salient for these areas of inquiry. So I'd like to, maybe in relatively machine gun fashion given time, but I'd like to explore how we might apply some of the broader ideas in the book to the more narrow domain of maximizing personal well-being. So let's start with vision. From my perspective, an individual can't even begin to define what notions like, quote, self-care and work-life balance are without having a clear, defined, and articulable personal vision. I'd actually go one further, again, me presenting the really strong case here, that in the absence of vision, something like work-life balance really is a vague, imprecise, largely meaningless idea that most people would struggle to even define beyond the broadest of broad strokes. So what role in your mind does vision play in helping people orient themselves toward that version of themselves that's at their healthiest, mentally, physically, and spiritually?
Let's go back to like vision. I think vision is this image, this picture, right, of a future, of desired, attractive future state. So it goes back to the beginning, at least that's how I think of it. You have to start with somebody, helping them to really fill in for themselves what that picture includes. And so it's really about the questions that you might offer to somebody. So one question might be something like, when you think about the future, let's just say for our conversation, 5 years out or 10 years out, and you imagine yourself, in terms of kind of vibrant health, what does that mean to you? What does that look like? What does it mean to you? So like even taking words like health or self-care and saying, what does that mean to you? You define it, because it is different. For one person, it might be, able to run a marathon. For somebody else, it might be like, well, taking a walk 3 times a week and getting my 30 minutes in. And so there's variability there based on interest, informed by research that we know, but also people can be authentic and find ways that really are interesting and fit for them. But our role in helping one another really, I think, has to start there. And so the vision comes out of that discovery and kind of playing with those ideas. What's missing in a lot of our, I think, healthcare systems around kind of trying to promote health, right, and healthy living and healthy behavior is the absence of what I'm talking about. So instead, people are kind of directed, well, you need to go do this. Our studies show you better make sure that you do walk 3 times a week or whatever, the example. And unless someone really sees how that fits in and helps them be able to, live in a way that they've kind of charted and for themselves, then those efforts fall flat. And we see that in terms of the treatment adherence data. Certainly that Lauren Dyke, who was on your show before, did in his research, but many others as well.
Yeah, look, and I mean, don't interpret this as pushback. I mean, this is me just playing devil's advocate a little bit earlier,
Sure.
Just a little bit, but taking into account just just what you've said about the general inefficacy and the ill-advisedness of compliance-based approaches to coaching and development, and now you talking about it in the context of self-care. I'm wondering if you think that there is some small case for compliance-based approaches in this area of self-care and well-being, just given particularly in America, not that my home country of New Zealand is much better in this area, but in America, the statistics around well-being are shocking and frightening. The statistical reality that well-being or the lack thereof is one of the most frightening, realities of life in much of the world right now. And so I just wonder, with just the urgency with which some of these statistics and these, outcomes need to be addressed, is there some space or is there some basis to say that a compassion-oriented approach runs the risk of not sufficiently lighting a fire under someone to get them to really reckon with the importance of their own health? I mean, is there, even giving aside the data that you've mentioned and the studies that you've just mentioned, is there room for something that we might call it compassionate compliance or something that's compassionate in its motivation, but compliance seeking in its application, perhaps? Like those circumstances where it really is a case of, if you don't do this, you're going to die, or something along those lines. Not to put it in too stark or invidious terms, but I think you get the point here.
Absolutely. And yes, I think of it as a both and not an either or. So I appreciate you giving me an opportunity to say that. So while we're talking about the merits, right, of coaching with compassion and leading with compassion, it is not to suggest that in all situations that's the only approach. And so what do I mean by that? Well, we can go back to what we know about how adults learn, and even intentional change theory as a theory that explains it. We know, though, that a wake-up call can also serve as a spark to getting somebody to be motivated to change. So while you and I have talked so far mostly around helping somebody discover what they care about in their future and to give some life to that, another way that we can spark the desire to change is a wake-up call. And so certainly in a health situation or context, I think there's plenty of examples around that. However, I think what we need to really understand is, while the wake-up call can get someone's attention, so that might serve as the initial kind of flame or fire underneath somebody, like you use that expression. A motivation really is about, on an ongoing basis, igniting an inner flame of desire. And so the person has got to figure out for themselves that that they do want to kind of push through or make the changes because the changes are tough. And personally, this has a lot of meaning for me. And I don't have to look too far for examples. And I have a feeling a lot of your listeners, the same is true for them. I had an uncle who was 50 who had open heart surgery and was told, you've got to change your eating habits, your diet, your condition, will improve with your effort. But if you don't, then, we don't hold out a lot of hope. This is completely in your hands. He also was a big smoker at that time. He chose, for whatever set of reasons, right? I didn't have an opportunity to have these conversations with him, but he opted not to embark on any change and ended up having a second heart surgery 5 years later, and he never came out of the hospital. He passed away. Now, that's a situation where he knew, he was told that, you can change the course of this. But he either was unwilling or unable to do that for himself. So each person's situation is unique, absolutely. But I think where the wake-up call and the kind of, I like to think of it as like the tough conversation, like, hey, if you don't change this, these are the dire consequences. Do you get this? That again has a purpose and kind of like lays it out for somebody. Like, let's not pretend here. Here's what's happening. And the data, especially in a health context, often the data can be a helpful guide and an important guide. But in terms of what you and I are also talking about, it's like, how does a person for themselves, but also as like helping others, how do they put the focus on sustained desired change, like going for the long haul? And that's where it's about like fundamentally changing, your sleeping routines, how you eat, the choices that you're making. And I think it's a commitment to ongoing learning and adjustment, which, sometimes isn't as fun or enjoyable as like going for the extra cake. You talk about the cake culture, and I know in another conversation we've had, the cake culture, right? The dopamine hit that we get from sugar, right? And so that's pervasive, which leads me to one other quick thing, and then I'm going to pause because I know you want to maybe talk about a couple things and we'll wrap up too. But organizationally or societally, we've got to also appreciate and support people in, being well. A lot of our organizational systems still don't acknowledge it. And so it's all about one part, which is get the job done, get the results. And there's often very little attention or permission that's given to individuals to take the time that they need to be well. Maybe it's like, get away from your desk, get up and move around. Maybe it's go work out at lunch. Maybe it's come in late because you went to, your workout class with your personal trainer in the morning. So that's what I mean by like, there's different ways that organizations can do that, but we've made progress as a society, but there's still a lot more work to do.
All right. And just to link this back, as you mentioned, Deci and Ryan and self-determination theory before, just linking back this notion of empowering the individual and giving the individual the resources and the tools they need to, pursue self-care kind of on their own terms. I'm wondering, because you mentioned the three facets of self-determination theory before, autonomy, competence, and connectedness. I'm wondering, this is sort of a two-part question. Have we maybe overcorrected in some sense when it comes to the autonomy side of things in terms of recognizing people's individual freedom and independence? As totally important as this is, I wonder if this has maybe come at the cost of making them incompetent with respect to following health maximizing behaviors. And it's also made a lot of people disconnected with respect to fostering resonant relationships, the ones that might actually allow them their health and well-being to flourish. I think maybe this is just a case of outliers or just some people. Everyone's different. But I sort of worry that at a societal level, with self-determination theory, we may have, at least in the West maybe, we may have overemphasized autonomy at the expense of health-related competence and connectedness. So I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that. And then the second question, just to tie back to something you put earlier about this tension that people have between wanting to be, wanting to have individual agency and do things themselves, in pursuing our own vision of our own best possible health, how can we achieve a balance between being self-managed and self-directed and self-motivated, putting the self in self-care, the autonomy piece of self-determination, with an emphasis on the necessity of building these resonant relationships and connectedness within those same pursuits? How do we reconcile being personally self-contained with being embedded in these totally necessary resonant relationships when it comes to how we best take care of ourselves?
There's so much that we could talk about. So maybe another podcast for all of it, Gareth, but let me try to respond to a couple things that are really popping up for me in what you've asked. I think it really starts with individuals seeing their kind of a role in the world as interconnected. So appreciating that, one thing that, I mentioned earlier that came up previously, and that is for many, it's like a new thought or one that they haven't quite accepted, that they are like the pebble that gets dropped in the pond. The rings, kind of reverberate or cascade out from every one of us. And so while independence is, I find it to be a luxury and a privilege, certainly in our culture, it's not how every culture is. There's cultures who are more individualistic, right? And others who are collectivist. And so for those where there's a stronger independence streak or an individualistic kind of societal or community-based norm, it's still appreciating in parallel that you're part of something much bigger than yourselves, and that you have a role to either kind of help others in that and support the work of what the team or the organization or whatever the context is, the society, right? Or you can continue to go on your own, but that then has consequences. So I think it starts there. And I see that as a very human thing. So one of my pet peeves is when people describe kind of our conversation and the nature of the work that we're touching upon as soft skills. It's just like the hair on the back of my neck goes up all the time, because these are human skills. This is just humanness. And how can we realize that, accept that, and also honor it in ourselves? That's what I think that part of the self-care is, honoring it in ourselves and honoring it in each other to help us get to the goal. So it's not that I'm not about productivity, results, and competition. I absolutely am. It's just that we are not often understanding or focusing on the path to get there. We are only like focused on the outcome and the result. And so that is a huge missed opportunity at the very least. And actually, I think kind of irresponsible on the part of people who are in positions of power and influence on another end. So I think that's a big piece of it. It's like encouraging or supporting rather others' independence, the autonomy, and providing that, we know, is a piece of what helps some people be really motivated, as we just talked about. However, it's not kind of like left unchecked. You're still operating in a bigger system, and understanding how your actions then impact others, I think, is where the responsibility for each of us lies. And so it goes back to taking care of ourselves in the best way, ensuring that we show up in our interactions with others and in our work in a way that, kind of honors that humanity. And not to broad brush this at all. Everything I just said is, I don't take that for granted. And it's something that actually requires deliberate intention on any given day. And I guess the last thought is, we are human. And so therefore we're imperfect. And so at any given day, if our intention is along the lines of what you and I've discussed, it doesn't mean that we're always able to kind of show up in the way that's ideal. And that's where we have to kind of continue to learn, continue to reflect and learn and improve. And that sets up for me a way of kind of being and living. And that is like lifelong learning. It's hard for me to see how people can actually venture through life on their journeys without some learning, but that actually at the end of the day is a choice for each of us, which goes back to autonomy.
Yeah, and look, Alan, you've always just had this. There's so much more ground we could cover today, but just as a way of winding things up, I just want to just comment on how much I appreciate how good you are at making the hard case for the so-called soft skills. And I have that same response to that term as well whenever it comes up with me. I feel like in our conversation today, you've done such a good and useful job of resolving what many people seem to think are impasses and obstacles, if not sort of like irreconcilable blockages between the hard end of achieving our KPIs and productivity and profitability and all that good stuff on the one end. And then, like you said, the human-centered view of it all, which is oriented around these topics that you've covered today: vision, compassion, resonance, connectedness, and so autonomy and so forth. I just think you've got a wonderful manner of being able to bridge the divide between, again, what just seem to be, insurmountable impasses to a lot of people in the business world. And this is why I think the work that you do is so important and why it has had so much impact on people, and why I have no doubt it's going to continue to have, ongoing impact on people. I really wish we had another hour, another 2 hours. I feel like we could keep this going for a long, long time and cover a lot more bases. But Alan, you've already been so generous with your time, so generous with your thoughts. I truly, truly appreciate you making the time to speak with me today and jump on the show. I've missed being able to collaborate with you day to day, as I mentioned earlier, but I'm just happy I got a chance to collaborate with you again today. So please accept this open invitation to come back on the podcast anytime. Keep being you, doing all the good work that you do, and serving and helping others in the way that you do. And just all the very best with everything you're doing there at Weatherhead and Life Beyond.
Thank you so much, Gareth. This has been just a ton of fun and a PEA moment for me. So thanks for helping me to be able to reconnect with you and to share some of these ideas with your listeners. So happy to come back soon and often, whatever works. So let's just say to be continued.
Absolutely to be continued. And I think I just shot up to my 3 in that 3-to-1 ratio as well. So I certainly got my PEA fill in the process as well, Alan. So thank you so much. Yeah. And we will certainly speak again soon, I hope.